So as we're talking about, moving to the multiverse and like potential for multiverses, before we really, dive into that, because that's a whole new regime, I heard that you're teaching a course on life on Mars.
Well,
So
astrobiology, yes.
yeah, so would you, I don't know, like obviously, like don't give the full rundown. That might take too long. But I was just asking, like maybe you would want to like discuss a few of the major points where you believe that we can sustain life on Mars, or would you think that that would
Well,
like one day human civilization will be able to live on Mars without a a constant rocket or like a constant journey from Earth, like without bringing resources from Earth, would a
yeah, yep.
civilization be able to exist on Mars?
I believe the answer is yes, it
Okay.
will. I don't think that's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years. I
Mm-hmm.
suspect we are talking about self sustaining settlements on Mars within the 21st century. I do believe that. It's a mix of both science and science fiction. I mean, we've obviously read lots of science fiction stories over the last century that have spoken about living on Mars. And let's face it, it's been in TV as well and the theaters. So putting aside the science fiction and just think about the science fact at the moment, Mars is an environment that has a lot of similarities to Earth. The soil's composition is very similar to ours. We are talking about significant quantities of ice on the planetary surface or just beneath the planetary surface. It's unclear whether or not there really is liquid aquifers under the surface, but regardless, there's a significant amount of ice that's on the surface. And so, you put that in a pressurized environment, melt it, all of a sudden you've got water, you break water down, you've got oxygen to breathe, you've got hydrogen for fuel. There is lots of similarities of the Martian environment that with a little bit of engineering, we will be able to utilize, and no different to surviving in Antarctica or some of the more extreme environments here on Earth. And it can be self-sustaining. It will require some support, obviously, from planet Earth initially, but once you get yourself up to a certain sustained level of enclosures, then you will be able to build your own crops and synthesize your own foods and so on and so forth. So I don't think we're that far away from doing that at the moment. The biggest hurdle, of course, is throwing enough material at that base settlement from Earth to get it to that self-sustaining level. And let's face it, our rocketry is pretty immature still.
Mm-hmm.
I remember what was that program that you loved, the Kerbal Space
Kerbal
Program, was
Space
it?
Program.
Right.
That's a
Okay.
game.
Okay. Never forgotten you in playing with that and so on and so on. We're nowhere near as developed as that program would suggest from a
Mm-hmm.
rocketry point of view. We can only deliver a few thousand kilograms of material to Mars every 26 months or thereabouts. So that's one of the biggest problems. But the answer to your question is, yeah, I think we can put a settlement there. We've got to be careful of the radiation environment. Absolutely. I'm not convinced that we are justified in terraforming Mars, but that's a conversation for later on. I think we can utilize the Martian environment with our own engineering and create self-sustaining settlements. And I don't think it's that far away, but I think we are talking decades.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not life is on Mars, that's the big question, because if life has survived from the earliest days of Mars's environment 4 billion years or so ago, that might be the biggest hurdle to overcome. Because, Martian life may be very dangerous to human life unless you and I are really Martians. The theory of panspermia suggests that meteorites from Mars, and we know there are about 70 or so on Earth at this point in time, at least, maybe they transported life from Mars to Earth back 4 billion years ago.
Wow.
And if that's the case, you and I are basically descendants of Mars biology. Well, in that case, Martian life is not going to be terribly dangerous to human life because we're one and the same. Who knows? But it is a going theory for panspermia. But if life does exist on Mars, that is going to be a big question mark with respect to, can we safely and successfully build a life on Mars? And if we are, can those folks ever return to Earth? So the question of the life on Mars has bigger implications than just, yes, we're not alone in the universe. It really does talk to the issue of whether or not we can safely colonize, settle Mars.
And is there any consideration of floating cities on Venus, or is that just purely science fiction?
To the best of my knowledge, that one's purely science fiction at this point in time. I like those stories, but I've not
Yeah.
heard anybody seriously talk about that, other than perhaps airborne laboratories, floating a science package in the atmosphere of Venus to study the Venusian environment. Getting a spacecraft onto the surface of Venus is really, really hard. And once you get it there, we've not survived for more than 5 hours because of the pressure, temperature, and the acidic environment, the erosive environment of the surface. So maybe our next best analysis of Venus outside of radar from orbit will be to balloon float a science package in the atmosphere. But that's not what you were asking. You were asking about floating cities. But the idea of floating science laboratories to better understand the Venusian environment, that's a real science concept at this point in time.